And now I'm going to invite the speaker, Tim.
Hello.
Hi, Tim. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Tim. I'm married to Miriam, and we have a 1-year-old son called Boaz. What else would you like to know?
Did you do a degree?
Did I do it? Yeah, so I studied theology at the University of Nottingham and got my master's there. So,
I think we are better, but sure, it's okay. One more question. What's your favorite country?
Favorite country?
And why?
Okay, I think my favorite country is Corsica, because I went there on holiday a few years ago. So Corsica is an island in the middle of the Mediterranean, and I'd only ever been on holiday to England, and suddenly I'm in a place where you can actually swim in the sea and in rivers. So I think that would be my favorite place, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Right, I'm going to leave you to the stage.
Okay. Well, since you guys have asked me a question, I'm going to ask you a question. It's totally unrelated to tonight's topic, but pretty funny question, actually. So you've got 3 doors in front of you. Behind one door is a fiery furnace. Behind the second door is a gunman. And behind the third door is a lion that hasn't eaten any food for 3 years. Which door do you choose? So who would choose the fiery furnace? Who would choose the gunman? And who would choose the lion? Guys with the lion, you're right. He hasn't eaten anything for 3 years. He's dead. So, well done. So, there we go. Totally unrelated to what I'm talking about tonight, but we are going to talk about heaven. Now, before I got a wife and started a family, I was a student like you. I survived on jacket potatoes and ready meals. My chosen sauce to cover up burnt food was salad cream. But as you'll probably know, being a student isn't always easy. When I was a student, I was worried that I wasn't good enough. And I remember a time when I'd had a really bad day and I hadn't got the grade I wanted. Then I had to bike home in the rain because we're in England and it always rains. And then not only that, my bike was broken. So I biked home in the rain on a broken bike, got to the shed in my back garden. There wasn't enough room to put my bike in the shed, so I threw it in. I said, "Stupid bike." And then I went in, slammed the door, and went upstairs and started to cry. Yeah, thank you. And my dad came upstairs because I was going to university near my house. And my dad said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I said through tears, "I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough." And I think at various times in our lives, we all ask that question. Am I good enough? And I don't know if you've noticed, but there seems to be an almost universal fear about whether we're up to standard. And in fact, this fear is so widespread that psychologists have labeled this feeling imposter syndrome. So Psychology Today writes this, says, "People who struggle with imposter syndrome believe that they are undeserving of their achievements. They feel that they aren't as competent or intelligent as others might think, and that soon enough, people will discover the truth about them. Those with imposter syndrome are often well accomplished. They may hold high office or have numerous academic degrees, and yet we still worry whether we're good enough." And so tonight we're going to explore that question, and we're going to explore that question specifically in relation to heaven. We're going to ask the question, who is good enough for heaven? Now, I don't know about you, but in the conversations I've had, there have been a lot of people who like the idea of heaven. In fact, there are also a lot of people who believe in heaven. Christians and non-Christians alike. Often when someone dies, people like to think of that person going to a better place. So I just want to give you a quick question to discuss on your tables. We're going to have a bit more discussion at the end, but this is just a quick one. Discuss amongst yourselves whether you believe in heaven or not. I'll give you a couple of minutes on that, and then we'll get a bit of feedback. Okay, I'm just going to bring it back. Those who believe in heaven, would you mind putting your hand up? Wow, quite a few people. Well, you might be surprised to hear this, or you might not be surprised to hear that belief in some sort of heaven or afterlife is really quite widespread. So in 2015, the Pew Research Center released a study showing that 1 in 7 Americans believe in heaven, where people who have led good lives are eternally rewarded. Statistics also show that 37% of people who don't believe in any religion in particular also believe in heaven. And generally, I'm not sure whether you've noticed this, but the principle of getting in is based on merit. Entering heaven depends, a bit like doing an exam, on the grade. It requires a good grade. And that does me no good because I'm rubbish at exams. So, for example, there's this critically acclaimed American TV show. Some of you might have heard of it. It's called The Good Place. And the basic idea in The Good Place is that a woman dies and goes to heaven. And again, the principle is this. You get to heaven based on whether you're a good person or not. Good people go to the good place, and bad people, like accountants and politicians, go to the bad place. Sorry, politics students. So the principle makes sense. In a just world, evil is punished and goodness is rewarded. But I think there's a fundamental problem with the Good Place's approach to heaven. How do we know whether we're good enough? Like the person with imposter syndrome, it's legitimate to worry about whether we're actually good enough for heaven. One writer put it like this. He says, "Death and what happens after death remains a source of profound anxiety and fear. There is simply no way to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, what awaits us on the other side, or if there even is another side. We often seek entertainment that allows us to ignore this solemn fact, at least for an hour or two." And I think in this case, the fear of the person with imposter syndrome is correct. I'm going to claim that we really aren't good enough for heaven. It really is something to worry about. Think of it this way. If heaven is perfect, what kind of person do you have to be to get in? The logical answer is a perfect person. I mean, it's no good going to heaven if it's not perfect and there are a bunch of imperfect people there, right? For Christians, heaven involves being in relationship with God because God is the standard of perfection. He's the source of all goodness, beauty, and truth. And yet that poses a problem because perfect goodness cannot stand evil. Perfect goodness, far from allowing evil to continue or go unpunished, will deal with evil properly. And that's why when we watch films like Taken and Liam Neeson picks up the phone and says, what does he say? "I'm coming to get you," or something. I can't remember the quote. We're like, yes, evil is going to be punished, okay? And when we reflect on our own moral state, I think we all realize that we don't meet our own standards, let alone God's. You see, good works aren't like a set of scales. We don't balance out our bad works with good works. Instead, our moral failings are a bit more like a criminal record that stand against us. So suppose a really good person goes out and commits a crime. Just because the person is good or has done more good things than bad things doesn't excuse the crime. The crime still requires a penalty, and the law still stands against the criminal because the criminal has failed to meet the standard. And so I think that we can know whether we meet the standard of getting into heaven or not, and the answer must be that we don't. Again, if heaven is a perfect place and we're imperfect, there's no way of getting in. The Russian novelist Alexander Solzhenitsyn put it like this. He said, "The line separating good and evil passes not through states, not between classes, not between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts." Another author put it like this. Around 100 years ago, the Times ran an article entitled, "What is Wrong with the World?" And the author, G.K. Chesterton, is supposed to have sent this letter in reply. "Dear Sir, I am yours, G.K. Chesterton." And so many people, while they like the idea of heaven, often try to avoid thinking about it. While a belief in life after death is widespread, continued reflection on death and mortality is a rarity. Continued reflection on our moral state and the prospect of going to heaven often produces despair and worry. It produces despair because when we think about it in any depth, we know that we failed to meet the standard. Not only that, it also produces fear of being found out. If we really do fall short of the standard, and our eternal destinies depend on whether we meet that standard or not, then we really should worry about being found out. And that's partly why the famous atheist philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche raged against God. In his book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, he wrote this about God. "God had to die. He looked with eyes which beheld everything. He beheld men's depths and dregs. He crept into my dirtiest corners. This most prying, over-intrusive, over-pitiful one had to die. He ever beheld me. On such a witness I would have revenge, or not live myself. The God who beheld everything, and also me, that God had to die. Man cannot endure it that such a witness should live." But Nietzsche's solution to the problem of failing to meet the standard won't do, because trying to kill God is an impossibility. Trying to run away from God or ignore him is just as silly. I don't know how many of you have heard of the story of Jonah. The story of Jonah in the Bible is about a guy who tries to run away from God. And if you've ever heard of this story, you'll know that God basically ends up sending a whale to swallow him. There's no running away from God. You see, if God is eternal and present everywhere, then neither of those strategies will work. If, as Christians claim, heaven isn't a place apart from God, but involves being in eternal, loving relationship with God, then thinking about heaven is tied up with our relationship to God. And again, if God is the source of all goodness, truth, and beauty, then we can't have heaven without him. All of our desires and longings for heaven are ultimately met in him. If we ignore him or fight him, both alienate us from our ultimate good, and that is him. The Christian solution is to paint a different picture. The solution to the problem isn't to run away from God or to fight against him. The solution is to run towards him. The Christian claim is that God knows exactly what we're like. He knows that we fail to meet the standard. But instead of abandoning a broken and guilty world, out of his perfect love, he enters into history to rescue us and restore us. The Christian claim is that Jesus is God in the flesh. He's come to deal personally with the problem because he's the only one qualified to fulfill it. He's the only one who can meet the standard because he is the standard. The standard of goodness is God himself. And so entering heaven doesn't depend on our ability. It can only depend on our relationship to Jesus and his ability. The Christian claim is that by his death on our behalf, he takes the punishment that we deserve, and by his perfect life lives the life that we couldn't live. In other words, Jesus wipes away our moral guilt, and he begins transforming us and making us new. By acknowledging our brokenness, by acknowledging that this kind of heavenly imposter syndrome has weight, and running towards Jesus and joining his team, everything he has done for us becomes ours. It's a bit like becoming an heir to a fortune. Those who are with Jesus inherit his riches, and he is rich enough to pay off our debt. There's a famous story where a man and his son really loved collecting art. And the son went into World War One, and he did a bit of drawing in the trenches, and he did a drawing just before he died. He went over the top and he died, and his friend bought the drawing to the father. And they'd spent years collecting art, and what the father did was put this cruddy drawing on his mantelpiece. And when the father died, people from miles around came to bid for the art collection. But the first thing that turned up in the auction was this fairly bad sketch. And so the auctioneer said, "Who'll bid £50? No hands up. Who'll bid £10? No hands up. Who'll bid £5? No hands up." And then the gardener bid 50p. And he said, "Sold. Auction over." And all the people were surprised. What's going on? How come the auction's over? We've come here to pay for all these different paintings. And the auctioneer said, there was a clause in this man's will that said, whoever purchases this picture that my son has drawn gets the entire collection. And the same is true when it comes to Christianity. Whoever takes the gift of the Son gets all the riches that come with that. And that offer is open to everyone. No matter how morally bankrupt, no matter how far gone, we're all in the same boat, and we all fail to meet the standard. Only by trusting in Jesus as King do we partake of his perfection. You see, if we choose to live a life apart from Jesus, nothing can be done about our moral failure. But if we trust in him, if we make him our representative, we're made heirs of what he has achieved. Now you might be worrying, I'm too far gone. Why would God come to save me? But there's a brilliant story in the Bible called the story of the prodigal son. And another father-son story. But the son goes up to his father and asks for his inheritance. And the father says, yeah, sure, take it. And he goes and spends it on riotous living, on partying, on food, on drugs, all that kind of thing. And he ends up wasting all his money and feeding pigs for a living. And then he says, you know what? Even though I've kind of done wrong by my father and I've wasted all the money he's given me, I'm going to go back and apologize to him. And so what happens is he returns to his father. And as he's approaching, he begins to say sorry to his father. His father runs towards him with open arms and embraces him. And it's a picture of God in the Bible. We might think of ourselves as broken, and we are, but God doesn't love us any less. He's waiting for us with open arms. Even while human beings nailed Jesus to a cross, he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So to sum up then, we've pointed out that belief in heaven is widespread. We've also pointed out that it's generally believed that you get into heaven on the basis of whether you're a good person or not. And if we're going to enjoy relationship with God, who is the perfect source of goodness and truth and beauty, then we need to be perfect. But we found that maintaining that standard of goodness is impossible, and we found that God, because he is perfect, could not allow evil to go unpunished. Running away from him or fighting him won't work. The only solution is if God makes his perfection available to us as a gift. We must throw ourselves on him. The only solution to our imposter syndrome is to recognize that we often fail, that God knows that we fail, but he still loves us and wants to rescue us. And that gift is open to you today. That gift is available to you. Again, you might be in a place of guilt. You might be in a place of fear about what might happen when you die. And the Christian message is that there's good news. Jesus overcame death, and he offers you the gift of himself and heaven as well. We've got a few discussion questions now, which will hopefully help you to unpack some of the questions that might have been raised by that talk. It's on the last slide, guys. So we're going to, I think, give 20 minutes or something to these questions on your table, 10 minutes. But I just want to thank you for listening. You've been a great audience. So have a good discussion. Thanks.